Peter Ralph starts things off. He represents Christopher Sawicki, who in 2008 was charged with second-degree murder and other offences in Piccadilly. Sawicki suffers from bipolar disorder and claimed he was having a manic episode at the time of the offences. Last week, he was given an absolute discharge, a decision that has prompted anger and confusion. To add some understanding, our court reporter Rosie Gillingham sat down with Ralph to talk about the case. That piece is coming up after this short break.
Dear Editor, as an individual who grew up in the trap skiffs of a fur over 6 decades ago, one whose heart and soul is
there have been a number of complaints as of late.
Dear Editor, the public's confidence in the Canada land.
This was a very high-profile case. I mean, it made headlines all across the province. Was it clear to you when you first took over the case what you were dealing with here?
Yes, as soon as I met Mr. Sawicki, it was clear that he was suffering severe symptoms of a mental illness. And in fact, when he was first arrested, he was sent pretty quickly to the Waterford Hospital, where they found that he was unfit to stand trial and was kept there for quite some time while they treated him for his mental illness. So it was very evident, not only because of my observations with him, but also because of the observations made by the people closest to him, including his common-law spouse and his neighbors.
How difficult was it to, now he was found not criminally responsible for the crime. How difficult was it to argue that in court?
In that particular case, it was a bit stressful because you're always concerned that a jury is going to reject that argument and that defense. But in that particular instance, it was perhaps a bit easier because the Crown basically was in agreement with the verdict, that they had retained their own expert who was in agreement with our psychiatrist that Mr. Sawicki was not criminally responsible. So it's a different situation than a situation where the Crown is saying, we don't accept that defense. We don't believe that it's true. In this instance, they did accept that. Because when it comes to this defense of not criminal responsible, of being not criminally responsible, it's different than other defenses. So, for example, if I'm pleading or arguing self-defense, I just have to raise a reasonable doubt when it comes to self-defense. But when I'm arguing mental disorder, I have to prove on the balance of probabilities that the mental disorder should exempt me from criminal responsibility.
Now, the doctors agreed, the lawyers, you guys were in agreement, and the jury agreed that he wasn't criminally responsible. But the public perception of this obviously was outrage.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think that there was an outrage at the initial verdict, and it's interesting, any outrage that existed at the time that this act took place, a lot of the outrage was that the RCMP had been advised that Mr. Sawicki was very ill and that he should be brought to hospital. And in fact, they went to see him the day that all this transpired, when his neighbor was killed. And his common-law spouse told the police that he should be picked up because he's very ill. In fact, for her own safety, she moved out because she was frightened of his behavior. So, I think if you go back and look at some of the stories in the press and on television at the time, a lot of the outrage was that this gentleman was killed unnecessarily, because if the system had done what it should do, Mr. Sawicki would have been in a hospital as opposed to roaming the streets.
And that, again, raises the issue of how misunderstood mental health issues are.
Yes, and I think as well, it's a misunderstanding from time to time by certain police officers about what their powers are. Because at the time, the police went to speak to him, and even some of the most psychotic people can appear to be fairly healthy for brief periods of time. It's not necessarily apparent right away that a person is delusional or having hallucinations or is psychotic. So in that instance, the police only spent a brief period of time with Mr. Sawicki, and they let him go. Now, they had been told by people closest to him, take him to hospital, take him to hospital, take him to hospital, and they didn't do it. Now, they had the power to pick Mr. Sawicki up and take him to a hospital to see a psychiatrist. And a psychiatrist then could have made that call. So that, I think, in many ways is the tragedy of Mr. Sawicki's case. That, and I think he has a certain, sadness. He's obviously very remorseful about what happened, a neighbor who was very good to him through the years, but has a great deal of sadness that, it all could have been avoided if the system had responded properly.
Is this common? Do you see this?
I think this is, I'm not sure how common it is, but it is fairly common. In fact, I did another similar case, murder case in Corner Brook, just a few years before that, and it was the same thing. Someone very close to my client told the police, "Look, my father is very sick. He needs help," and she repeatedly told everyone around that was the case, and nothing happened. So, I think it happens fairly regularly, but I wouldn't say it happens every day, but it's certainly striking when you see two cases where the result is so tragic, and that we know that perhaps something could have been done.
So what does need to be done, in your opinion?
Well, a lot of things need to be done by our community, and I think we're getting better at this. Once upon a time, I think the Waterford had 500 people in the hospital or 600 people in the hospital. Now, there's perhaps under 100 that are considered sort of mentally ill patients. So there's a lot more people in our community, but unfortunately, the money that was saved from that was not put into supports. And I think for a long period of time, we thought really that psychiatric services meant giving someone basically a shithole for a bed sitting room and a pill, and that represented mental health services. But what we realize now is that people need a safety, a meaningful place to live, a safe place to live, a good place to live. They need meaningful employment, meaningful activity, and a sense of community. And that is going to change people's lives and is going to keep them well and keep them out of trouble. So that's what you need to do. You need to create, a mental health system is not just giving someone a psychiatrist. It's much more than, I think we all know that from our own experience, that, the times that we're best off mentally is when we have a well-rounded life. And that's true for people with mental illnesses. That's an important thing. And the other thing that we have to realize too is that, if we try to get tougher with people who have mental illnesses in terms of maybe we should put them in jail as opposed to a hospital, at the end of the day, I don't think that makes us safer. Because what happens is that you have a mentally ill person who goes to a jail and may or may not get decent treatment. Certainly there's no psychiatric unit at our penitentiary here in St. John's. So they may hit the streets worse off than when they went in. So in fact, the community becomes a less safe place to be. And it's interesting because the most recent amendments by the Harper government, are really trying to make it so that people who are found not criminally responsible spend more time in hospital, and it's harder for them to get out. The end result will be fewer people will go that route. Because I'll tell my clients, look, if you go not criminally responsible, you could be in hospital for 10 years. If you plead out and go to prison, you might be there for 18 months or 24 months. So at the end of the day, society is likely to be less safe.
Okay, and in your opinion, does the future, has there been any movement at all to help these people?
Well, I think we've come a long way in the last, 20 years. You see organizations like Stella Burry Channel. You see a lot more support in the community for people with mental illnesses. I think we know which direction we should be going in, and it's happening. Perhaps not as quickly as those of us who are involved would like to see, but it is happening.
Christopher Sawicki is one of hundreds of people who come through the court system with mental health issues every year, most of whom don't commit violent crimes. And Ralph says until there's an understanding of the importance of getting these people community support, they'll likely be back time and time again. It's time to stop blaming the person, Ralph says. It's time to focus on getting these people help. It's only then when our communities will be safer. For The Telegram, I'm Rosie Gillingham.